This is the Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire. On today's program, I want to talk about one of the most powerful political leaders in the world in his time, Sir Winston Churchill, the head of Great Britain, the man responsible for defeating Adolf Hitler in World War II, the man who was photographed with the allies against Hitler, who were Stalin and Franklin Delano Roosevelt and others in that famous picture. He is a brilliant intellect, as well as one of the most fascinating world leaders of all time and politicians. And so this is what he writes in an article written in 1920 in the prestigious British Illustrated Sunday Herald. Sir Winston Churchill writes, "From the days of Spartacus Weishaupt to those of Karl Marx and down to Trotsky, Russia, Bela Kun, Hungary, Rosa Luxemburg, Germany, and Emma Goldman, the United States, this worldwide conspiracy for the overflow of civilization and for the reconstitution of society on the basis of arrested development, of envious malevolence, I'm pronouncing that wrong, I apologize, and an impossible equality has been steadily growing. It played, as a modern writer, Mrs. Webster, has so absolutely shown, a definitively recognizable part in the tragedy of the French Revolution. It has been the mainspring of every subversive movement during the 19th century, and now at last this band of extraordinary personalities from the underworld of the great cities of Europe and America have gripped the Russian people by the hair of their heads, and they have become practically the undisputed masters of that enormous empire." What is Sir Winston Churchill saying? Now let's first establish a fact. The fact is that the Illuminati, the secret occult societies behind communism and socialism, and many of the modern social and revolutionary movements of our time, was a fact. It was a fact by the most intelligent and powerful world leaders at the time. The only people that ever used the words conspiracy theory to describe these facts were the men and women who have arisen in the last 10 or 20 years through the dumbed down educational universities, which issue diplomas based on your ignorance and your ability to be manipulated. Every single serious thinker, listen carefully, every single serious thinker, intellectual, world leader, knew fully well the truth of what the goal of worldwide communism was, as Sir Winston Churchill clearly reflects. The only people who babble this word conspiracy theory are the dupes, are the stooges that dominate the cable news networks. These people, for the most part, there are a few exceptions, but not that many, and I'm not being kind, I'm being accurate. These talking heads, these personalities with, they're relatively attractive people, male and female, and they dress well, and they're lit well, and they have makeup, and they have all the props to make them look like they know what they're talking about, including the political leaders who come from the same mold and the political thinkers who came from the same mold. All of these people in the last 10 or 20 years share a common denominator, and that is they are uneducated, illiterate, ill-informed, and have absolutely no clue what real history is all about. They have been given their position Make no mistake about this. Make no mistake about this. The doors open for them. They got their positions. They got their positions of power in politics and the media and journalism precisely because they were not too bright. The light bulb was dim in their brains. That's why they got the job. Because the very powerful powers that really control our world in media did not want deep thinking people that would ask the important questions. They wanted a series of dupes and stooges and men and women who would go along with the program and willingly lie for the so-called prestige of being a media personality. Understand that that is an analysis which is factual. You contrast this collective stupidity in the part of the mass media and politics and culture and so on and so forth, and you read the writings of the truly great world leaders who were deep intellectuals, not just Sir Winston Churchill. We could fill an encyclopedia with the names of great political world leaders who really knew their stuff, like Sir Winston Churchill did. You notice what Winston Churchill is talking about. Nobody, including this cadre of pipsqueak journalists, would have dared to say to Winston Churchill or men of his stature to accuse him of making a conspiracy theory. You know why? Because Winston Churchill would have overpowered them with his intellect and his knowledge of history, that in a passing remark he would have reduced them to rubble. This is a guy that was known for being a genius and one of the world's most effective leaders. And he says these words, from the days of Spartacus Weishaupt. Now, the reason he says that is because Sir Winston Churchill, unlike the clown show that runs our nation today and the media, is fully aware of the power and the influence of the Illuminati in world events, wars, and global events. So he begins his first sentence by mentioning a man named Weishaupt. Weishaupt's full name is Adam Weishaupt. Adam Weishaupt is the official founder of the occult secret society called the Illuminati that was officially formed in 1776. Fact. And then he speaks of him. Winston Churchill speaks of Weishaupt by starting with the word Spartacus. All of us know who Spartacus is. There have been movies made by him. He was a heroic hero and fighter. And so Winston Churchill says, from the days of Spartacus-Weishaupt. The reason he phrases his sentence that way is because Spartacus is the Illuminati's secret code word for Adam Weishaupt. Because within the structure of the Illuminati, at least at that time, the most powerful leaders were never referred to by name. They were referred to by their code names. And so Sir Winston Churchill reveals that he understands the inner workings of the Illuminati, and he just blows apart Weishaupt's cover by using his secret code name first. And so he says, from the days of Spartacus Weishaupt to those of Karl Marx, down to Trotsky, Russia, Bela Kun, Hungary, Rosa Luxemburg, Germany, and Emma Goldman, United States, this worldwide conspiracy for the overthrow of civilization and for the reconstitution of society on the basis of arrested development of envious malevolence. Again, my pronunciation is not that great. A definitely recognizable part in the tragedy of the French Revolution, it has been the mainspring of every subversive movement during the 19th century, and now at last this band of extraordinary personalities from the underworld, the criminal cartel of the great cities of Europe and America, have gripped the Russian people by the hair of their heads and have become practically the undisputed masters of that enormous empire. Now, what is he saying? Sir Winston Churchill is saying in the 1920s that there is an historical flow that we should be aware of that begins with the plotting of the Illuminati, which is still alive today. And this plot by the Illuminati is started by the Illuminati's founder, Adam Weishaupt, who uses the code name, the secret code name, Spartacus. And then Sir Winston Churchill basically gives us the sequence of a true conspiracy designed to enslave mankind. So Weishaupt, who is head of the Illuminati, he says, is influencing, financing, and controlling Karl Marx, who is the author of the Communist Manifesto. And then from Karl Marx to the Russian communist dictator Trotsky, and then from the Russian dictator Trotsky in Russia, this communist revolution manufactured crisis game plan developed by the Illuminati, and at this point is called communism or Marxism, is picked up by Belakan in Hungary, and then picked up by a woman called Rosa Luxemburg in Germany, and then Emma Goldman in the United States, who was a powerful socialist leader woman. And then he sums up what this network of people he just named is all about. This is Sir Winston Churchill. This worldwide conspiracy for the overthrow of civilization and equality has been steadily growing. It played as a modern writer, Mrs. Webster has so ably shown, a definitively recognizable part in the tragedy of the French Revolution. It has been the mainspring of every subversive movement in the 19th century, and by the way, beyond, up until our time. And now, at last, this band of extraordinary personalities from the underworld of the great cities of Europe and America have gripped the Russian people by the hair of their heads and have practically become the undisputed masters of that enormous empire. So this is before Sir Winston Churchill defeated Adolf Hitler and his dictatorship, which was called National Socialism. And Sir Winston Churchill, who himself was a member of the occult, he was a Druid priest that goes back to the ancient secret societies that were in existence at the time of the building of Stonehenge, before and afterwards. And a Druid priest is not some barbaric individual. It's an individual who's highly educated and trained. So Sir Winston Churchill himself is part of secret societies. But whatever secret society Sir Winston Churchill is a part of, it's obvious that he has a huge degree of integrity and excellence, so that even though he is a member of a different kind of secret society, he is totally against this dark, evil conspiracy of the other secret societies. And we must recognize that this conflict, this fight that is going on within the different secret societies exists up into this very moment. You need to understand that not everybody who is a Mason or Freemason is evil, or that not everybody in certain occult secret groups is evil. There are fierce battles within these groups where you have the good side, the satanic side, and the other side may not be, quote, Christians, but at least they believe in benevolence, they believe in virtue, they believe in integrity, and to whatever degree they do share biblical ideas. Sir Winston Churchill is one of many men who fit into that category. So, he's warning the world of a conspiracy. Now, this conspiracy is exactly what is happening right at this very second in the United States of America and the world. You need to recognize that. And that's why I'm giving this prophetic emergency warning regarding America. The date that has been announced is November 4th, that these revolutionary activities and emotional contagion will be released. Again, I want to emphasize, if these events are not triggered exactly on November 4th, does not mean that they are not going to be triggered. It simply means that the secret elite behind them have changed the calendar, that they've changed the date or dates in which they're going to launch their campaign. It by no means even remotely suggests that they're not going to continue on with their secret operations. They've merely changed the date. So you need to raise your perception higher and not get caught up in accepting or dismissing something simply because a date comes to pass or a date doesn't come to pass. The other thing Sir Winston Churchill is teaching us, and I could be quoting from many great men of history, he's teaching us that these revolutionary groups, and many of them are the wealthiest and most powerful people in the world, along with students and all kinds of people, they are very busy and they are completely dedicated. Listen carefully. You really have to pay attention. You have to own what I'm sharing with you. You have to, whatever it takes for you to educate yourself and recognize that this is not an opinion or a statement of paranoia, but what I'm sharing with you is the absolute truth, and you are responsible as a man or a woman before God. You are directly responsible to react properly and intelligently to the warning that I'm giving you. And I cannot state that but in the most serious terms. This is not a game time. This isn't game time. It's not an illusion. This is what is really happening in our nation. We have been warned about this for about 100 years through secular prophets, through men and women who write and speak and could be considered to whatever degree biblical prophets, not in the sense, of course, of Joel or Ezekiel or Isaiah, but prophetic ministry still exists today. Prophetic spokespeople still exist today. They're just not in the infallible category that is exclusively reserved to the to the Old Testament prophets. Now, having said that, we have been warned for 100 years. The game plan of these secret societies has always been to create a global dictatorship. And I need you to pay attention. I know I'm repeating this word, but people have a tendency of daydreaming. Their plan from the very beginning, when we're going back to the plan they outlined during ancient Babylon at the Tower of Babel in what was called Mystery Babylon. Now, this is a complex and detailed subject. There's no way you're going to master it in 5 minutes. I would strongly suggest to you that you get my books, A Prophecy of the Future of America, that you get the book Mass Awakening, that you definitely get the book that was released this week called Conquering the Matrix, and that you get your hands on a copy of a powerful book that I wrote with my good friend Troy Anderson, a Pulitzer Prize nominated journalist, called The Babylon Code. Those books, along with a completely different book, a new book called A Prophecy of the Future of America 2016-2017, especially along with the book Conquering the Matrix, will give you documented information, easy to understand, a fast read that will show you that there is irrefutable proof to back up what I'm alleging, that there's so many facts behind it, it's impossible to deny. And you need to own and master that truth, because these techniques that were developed in Mystery Babylon at the Tower of Babel are the very techniques that are being used now, in the words of the secret societies themselves. So, their goal from the beginning, and this is the part where I need you to take a deep breath. If you need to get a cup of coffee, you need to get it, or caffeine, or something to energize your brain, because I've noticed a basic principle in life. When you begin to present powerful, powerful truth to people on a very deep level, even though you're being coherent in your communication and you're being clear and you're making it easy for everyone to understand, the nature of the information, listen carefully, this is not a game, the nature of the information that I'm going to share with you is so powerful, but it is also, because it's powerful, disruptive to your normalcy bias, which means your mind seeks sameness. Your mind, as a psychological principle, seeks equilibrium and peace by always seeking out what you perceive to be normal, even if that normal is a complete fraud and distortion. So you have to understand that powerful psychological principle is very much at work in this discussion. How this plays out is the human mind will always gravitate, due to the normalcy bias, it will always gravitate to accepting lies as the truth, to accepting falsehoods as the truth, and to denying reality and to deny facts, as long as the mind can avoid the tension and the psychological unrest that will momentarily occur if its present concept of what is normal is in any way disrupted. In other words, listen carefully, the average human mind would prefer a lie, an illusion, and a distortion of the truth over the truth, simply because the human mind always gravitates to what it considers normal. And the psychological tension that is released in the average human being when they're presented with facts that cannot be refuted, but then it implies that they must accept a new reality based on truth, is, like it or not, a very threatening thing to the deep inner psychological mind of every person. And therefore, people will always deny what is rational and what is truthful and what is a fact, and they will suppress that in their human mind in order to achieve a state of sameness, not rock the boat, and embrace the reality that they're comfortable with. Because even if that reality is designed to cover up some hideous and evil events, the principle of sameness in the human mind is so strong that the human mind would prefer to be lied to and would be prefer to be manipulated versus having to deal with the truth, which would cause them to rethink their position. That creates tremendous anxiety and fear in many people. An example of this would be, and don't think for a moment that the experts in psychological mind control, the experts in propaganda and persuasion and indoctrination, who are very much a part of our media and educational system and political system, don't think that these experts don't understand this dynamic completely, because they do, and they exploit it to their own ends. So let's use this as the defining case in point. The defining case in point would be when you have a household, let's say, hypothetically, where a father is sexually molesting his daughter, let's say at 4 years old. Or it could be, the sexual abuse of a mother to the son. But statistically, it's the male that overwhelmingly commits this sexual abuse statistically over females. It's a male crime, basically. So the mother and the wife loves her husband deeply and wants to believe the best in him because she loves him deeply, and they have a happy life. The mother loves her daughter deeply and wants to protect her and have a happy life. And then what will happen is that the mother will begin at some point to notice certain clues, which potentially could imply that the husband or her daughter's father is sexually molesting her at a very young age. Now, since these clues are not conclusive and they're somewhat speculative and non-conclusive, she immediately sweeps them under the carpet, so to speak, and pushes them in the back of her mind, because to go any further would cause such psychological tension, she would practically crack, and it would destroy her entire world. But let's say the evidence begins to increase in intensity slowly, but she keeps denying it. She keeps denying it because it's just too much for her to handle, and it would change her entire world. And then finally, let's say after 2 years, she finds what most people would think would be definitive proof that the husband, father, is molesting his now, let's say the daughter is 5 or 6 years old. And let us say hypothetically that the truth is she's listening on the bedroom door of her daughter, and she hears certain discussions between her husband and her daughter that are quite shocking. And they imply that he is sexually abusing his daughter. She can't handle it. She suppresses it in her subconscious. She begins to drink. She can't admit it to herself. She can't admit it to her husband. She can't talk about it with her daughter because it would cause her to have a nervous breakdown, because the mind always seeks psychological equilibrium. And let us say, as a finale, that somehow, let's say it's just hypothetically, there's some kind of video machine or video recorder that she discovers in her husband's possession, but let's say hidden away in his closet or whatever, which, without being graphic, reveals enough, let's just put it that way, to prove that indeed he is unquestionably guilty of sexually violating and molesting his daughter. Now, at that juncture, a number of mothers and wives summon the courage to go to a professional, get help, and leave their husbands if necessary, and take care of it. But there is a disturbingly high percentage of women that simply, despite the fact that they now have visual video evidence, simply cannot bear to admit to themselves that this crime was committed, and therefore they suppress it deep in their subconscious. They pretend it never happened. And in the process of this kind of pretending and denying of reality, what always occurs is people become a little bit psychotic, because it takes you into the realm of being slightly insane if you're making a choice to deny a disturbing reality, which you know is a fact, because you're afraid of that your normal world will explode. You're afraid of all the emotions. What's at stake is your wonderful marriage, you think is wonderful, your husband, father, the love, everything that you hold dear. You're afraid it's going to burn up when confronted with the truth. And so in an irrational choice, based on this very powerful principle of the normalcy bias, this woman whose husband is a molester of his daughter, she ignores the truth to support the normalcy bias. And this happens quite a bit. And what happens is that years later, that daughter grows up and then is older. She's in her late teens by now or whatever. And she is furious and angry at her mother and confronts her mother and her father and hates her mother because her mother didn't do anything about it. And the daughter knew that she knew. And the hatred towards the mother is just about unrepairable. Now, that is a story that very much illustrates the normalcy bias that professional agitators, revolutionaries, social engineers, psychologists, experts in emotional contagion, propaganda, psychological warfare, etc. These men and women know all of these principles and they use them in our nation. So now transferring that teaching to our world and our society, what you have in America today and around the world is you have an extremely large number of politicians from both political parties. You have an extremely high number of pastors and Christian leaders. You have an extremely high number of journalists, politicians, and professionals in all kinds of realms who are 100% aware of the fact that truth is being manipulated, a revolution is being artificially created based on lies, that a emotional contagion is being deliberately generated, and that the intent of these people is to destroy America and overthrow it. But these politicians, these high-level personalities with a lot of power, CEOs, actors, actresses, media spokespeople, law enforcement, high-level law enforcement officials, and a whole spectrum of society's leaders refrain from dealing with it for the same reason that the mother refrains from dealing with the molestation in her household, because they understand that to deal with it would be, it would create financial chaos in their world. They could jeopardize their jobs. It would shatter their normalcy bias. So it's human nature. It's the gravity of human nature is to go into escapism and deny it. Unfortunately, if you're committed to the truth, you cannot deny it. Winston Churchill didn't, neither am I. So in order to maintain a clean conscience before God, myself and other people are compelled to speak out and warn God's people and others of what is being planned, and to call upon you and others to do what you are called to do by God, and that is to speak the truth in love, and that is to raise up a standard against the evil that is planned here. And that is the purpose of the Paul McGuire Report, and that is the purpose of this particular prophetic emergency warning to America. I am asking you to spread this message far and wide, as fast as you can, to as many people as you can, using your gifting, in social media. Many of you know how to use Facebook and all the other social media. You're highly effective. I'm asking you, for the sake of America and the future, to help spread this message far and wide, to counteract what is being planned, and then to enlist God's people and call upon God's people to immediately go into emergency sessions of intercessory prayer and intercessory prayer warfare in order to stop this evil plot. That's what I'm asking you to do. It's not for the purpose of any personal financial gain or anything like that. I simply need you to spread this message to as many people who need to hear it as fast as you can. Because if you don't, there exists the possibility that this attempted coup could succeed. If it succeeds and they allow the manufactured crisis to escalate, what will inevitably happen is we will go into a state of martial law to manage the chaos. It doesn't matter whether the martial law is called for from the right or the left. The results will be the same. And once that happens, the people that are engineering these things will have won. We will have lost all their freedoms if we go into martial law. We will have no constitution, no Bill of Rights, no freedom of the press, no freedom of religion, no freedom of assembly, and America, as we know it, will be over. We will be into a totalitarian state that was engineered through manufactured chaos and radicals who suddenly appeared out of nowhere, but in truth were highly organized, highly trained, bankrolled by super billionaires who had the long-term plan of bringing America down. That's the emergency warning, the first part of it. And again, I'm asking you to go to paulmcguire.us, spread the word of this message far and wide. Use your creative abilities to get people to read it. And we have at paulmcguire.us so many different kinds of social media icons that you can use. You need to do this to spread it far and wide, because this is our opportunity to fend and conquer. If we miss this opportunity, we could easily see, this is not an exaggeration. That's why I've refrained from talking about it, because you don't want to be guilty of constantly alarming people so they don't hear it anymore. But at this juncture, the percentage possibility for things to spin out of control, and to spin out of control on a level that most people do not anticipate could happen, due to that false perception of reality, we are in a very dangerous place. And we need to alert people as fast as we can. So visit paulmcguire.us. We have a whole list of social media icons, and spread this message far and wide. In terms of practicalities of what we are doing, we're doing a number of things to educate people to lead in prayer. At the next Paradise Mountain Church meeting, which is coming up in November, and you can get the date at paulmcguire.us. We are going to have a prayer meeting where I'll give a prophetic teaching on what is happening, and I will explain these things in terms of the light of Bible prophecy, but we will also engage in a time of intercessory prayer, which we need to do. Now, I want you to mark this date down in your calendar, and I want you to come. Whether it's convenient or inconvenient is irrelevant. This is a spiritual crisis, and you need to respond carefully. So let me give you the date of the next Paradise Mountain Church meeting, where we're going to stand in the gap and pray and intercede that this will not happen. The Paradise Mountain Church meeting is Friday, November 17th in North Hollywood, and you can get the address, the time, the maps, by going to paulmcguire.us. Obviously, all of the church meetings are free, but for security purposes, you need to register before you attend, and then the meeting's free. And all that will be explained on the website. Now, the important thing to understand is that I can't stress the urgency of the time we're in. And I believe anybody that has even the most remote sensitivity to the Holy Spirit understands the gravity of this hour, and they can sense the Holy Spirit calling them to engage in spiritual warfare through prayer and intercessory prayer. And so I'm encouraging you to obey the Lord Jesus Christ as he's calling you now by his Holy Spirit, and make whatever sacrifice that is necessary and show up. And you know, there's another principle. When it's a small number of people that are obedient to God and actually show up, let's say a Gideon's band, God rewards those people because they heard his voice. They didn't pretend they didn't hear his voice. And God will bless you, and I will deliver a powerful prophetic message from the Word, and you will be ministered to. That's the most important thing in the meeting, that we don't want anyone to leave our church meetings without being personally ministered to. So I always make myself available to pray for every single person if they choose to be prayed for on an individual basis. So that evening will be an evening of victory, and we can turn the tide of the spiritual battle if you're willing to join us and participate. So that's Friday, November 17th. You can get the details at paulmcguire.us. This is the Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire, and I want to bring this up to you. What I just shared with you really is nothing new. We've been warned about this for 100 years. And it's hard for many of us to accept that it's now actually happening, because we've been warned, we've heard it's been happening literally for decade after decade after decade. And so we've become somewhat insensitive and somewhat cynical about it. Well, the events that are transpiring in our nation have never transpired before. We're in a totally unique environment. And due to the fact that there is a synchronization of timing in terms of the global economy, the national economy, the volatility in racial relationships and different peoples, the fact that very radical groups are growing in strength, and they're being heavily financed. Again, George Soros dropped $18 billion last week to finance essentially a revolution. And that's a lot of money. So let's look at Sir Winston Churchill's words so we can understand what's going on. First of all, there is no logical or rational excuse for maintaining a position of skepticism regarding what I just said. Because if you attempt to turn a blind eye or pretend that there is no danger, it is a blatant contradiction of the economic, geopolitical, social realities that are going on in our country right now. You need to understand that this plan for a new world order has never been fictional. It has never been a conspiracy theory. And it has always been, first and foremost, going back hundreds of years, in the minds of the elite. In the 1800s and the early 1900s, the Fabian socialists mapped out this plan in detail. Men like Aldous Huxley, and Julian Huxley, H.G. Wells, and other Fabian socialists and thinkers. They mapped out the plan, Bertrand Russell. And under the guise of this term globalism, and globalism has been sold erroneously to be a positive word. But the reality is, whenever a nation like America has implemented the policies of globalism, there has been nothing but absolute horrific negative economic consequences that happen to the middle class and the working class. So you can portray globalism as this golden new age of economic opportunity all that you want. But to date, by signing globalistic trade treaties and embarking on globalistic programs, there is a direct, measurable economic and social consequence to passing all the secret trade treaties. It's indisputable. It's hidden from you by the media because the media is owned by just 6 globalist corporations. And their goal, the elite's goal, see, here's the biggest con, the biggest lie. And again, I'm asking you to pay attention because most people don't know this. The biggest lie, the biggest con, the biggest ripoff in this entire idea of globalism is that it promises one thing, but always, without exception historically, delivers the opposite. So, for example, when the communist revolutionaries moved into Russia, which is what Sir Winston Churchill was talking about, you need to understand the factual realities of what really happened, not the lies that you were taught in the educational system or the media, because they have rewritten history. You need to understand that the people of Russia, and this is the opposite of what you've been told, the people of Russia were not suffering, they weren't starving, they weren't in slavery when the people of Russia lived under the rule of the Tsar, which was an all-powerful king who ruled Russia, but he ruled Russia benevolently. In other words, he wasn't a ruthless dictator. He protected his power, but he was benevolent. He looked after the good of the people. And so, despite the fact that the Russian people living under the Tsar did not have a perfect world, they had, relatively speaking, a basically good world. People were not starving. They had food. They could own their own houses. The economy was relatively strong. They prospered. Very importantly, they were given by the Tsar of Russia all kinds of freedoms. They have freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, freedom from unreasonable search and seizure. They had many laws that defended their freedoms. And so, in summary, the people of Russia were relatively happy people. Okay? They were relatively happy people. They were prosperous people, and they had a lot of freedoms. So why would a people that were happy, prosperous, and had a lot of freedoms, why would they risk those freedoms to join, at that time, which was a completely unproven communist revolution, and tear apart based on a promise which had no proof behind it? Why would they willingly join up in a communist revolution which promised all these things, but they had no record of what they accomplished? So if you look at it in an historically accurate sense, there's no way that the Russian people, who were relatively happy, would ever have voluntarily chosen to join in this communist revolution. And yet what is being taught in the schools and the colleges and the seminaries and in the media was that the Russian people were horribly suffering and the noble communists came in to save them. That is a total lie, total falsehood. Watch the movie. It's a little bit dated. It's a romantic movie with a lot of singing, but it's very, very, very well done. Watch the movie Dr. Zhivago, in which Barbra Streisand is the co-star. And in Dr. Zhivago, and this is one of her better movies, in Dr. Zhivago is a prosperous doctor because he's trained medical doctor, and he has a nice house and that he worked for, and he is living in a relatively prosperous Russia, and even the common people are prospering. But by the time the war is over, he goes back to his large house, and the communists have taken over the city, and his house has been divided into these little mini sections, and he has to share it with about 50 people. So it's crowded. He's being screamed at and yelled at because the communists have taken away all private property. So this communist revolution, he quickly finds, and Barbra Streisand quickly finds out, doesn't help anything. It's a total brutal dictatorship, and if you don't fall in line, you're shot. And the people in Russia who were seduced by it bitterly regret it, because now, for the first time, they're starving and they've lost all their freedoms. Okay, so this is the important thing. This is what has occurred in America and around the world. Let's take the United States and Russia. The two nations apparently have a long history of opposing ideologies and have come close to war numerous times. The average American sees themselves as individualists and the Russians as socialists and communists. But who really financed the Russian Revolution? This is what you have to ask yourself. Who really financed the Russian Revolution? Which, by the way, like just the Russian Revolution and communist Russia alone either starved to death, tortured, or murdered approximately 80 to 100 million people. 80 to 100 million people were slaughtered, killed, or starved. Now, who financed that? First of all, you need to understand something. Wall Street, the super capitalists, financed it. And they paid for the weapons of the Russian revolutionaries, and they also financed the weapons of the other side. Trotsky and the other communist leader who led the revolution, they were failures when they started, okay? Nobody in Russia wanted to join the communist revolution. So powerful, super wealthy families from the international banking families of Wall Street, these powerful families on Wall Street bankrolled, financed this communist revolution in Russia. Again, the people of Russia did not want a communist revolution. So they couldn't win any converts to the communist revolution. Okay? Trotsky was this basically starving guy who published this obscure little Russian newspaper, communist pamphlet and newspaper in the East Village of New York. Nobody took him seriously. Nobody was interested in his garbage. But all of a sudden, he's got Wall Street behind him. And then the other Russian revolutionary joined him. And the Wall Street powerful money people spent endless millions of dollars shipping in guns, bombs, ammunition via train and boat into Russia, all right? And gave these initial Russian revolutionaries tons of cash, because what would happen was they would go from town to town, city to city. None of the Russians were interested in their stupid communist revolution. But so Wall Street wanted that revolution to happen, despite the will of the Russian people. And they literally paid off thugs, criminals, and gangsters to fight the communist revolution for them. And so with fierce resistance, because the Russian people wanted nothing to do with this nonsense, the Wall Street banking system kept funneling in hundreds of millions of dollars into this communist revolution. And they eventually conquered Russia city by city with an army of hired criminals and thugs to bring about the revolution. The Russian people never wanted it because they were doing okay without it. This is one of the great lies of history. And so Wall Street and Illuminati money forced the communist revolution to succeed, and let me emphasize, against the will of the people. All right? So, why? Now, this is perhaps one of the most important parts in what I'm sharing with you, and one you've never heard in education or the media. The purpose of socialism, the purpose of communism, the purpose of progressivism has never been to create a paradise for the worker, as they tell them. The purpose of a communist revolution has never been to liberate the oppressed people. The purpose of a communist revolution has never to bring about freedom. The purpose of a communist revolution is never to feed the hungry, create social justice, and to bring utopia on earth. That has never been the purpose of a communist, socialist, Marxist revolution. That's how they sell it. Those are the lies they use and promises they use in selling it. But anybody with an IQ above that of a snail simply has to look at the results, the measurable, accurate data which reveal the true results of every single communist revolution in the history of mankind, and you will see, without exception, a common denominator. And that is, in every single communist revolution, without exception, the people end up being far, far worse than they were before. They end up starving to death, worse than they were before. They end up having all of their freedoms stolen and trampled upon, which they had before the communists took over. The communists promise a utopia and social justice. The exact opposite happens. And in nations like China, you have 140 million people. Those are the latest data that came out of China within the last 3 years, because the actual death count, because of Chairman Mao, the communist revolutionary, was hidden. He killed about 140 million of his fellow Chinese people by deliberately demanding that their farmers follow his insane farming plan, which caused the starvation of 40 million Chinese due to this insane communist farming plan. He also shot, murdered, killed, and starved to death a total of 140 million people in China. You go down the list of nations, there's no exception whatsoever to the outcome of a communist revolution. So why is it that the heads of the communist revolution make these great promises? Here is the great secret that you will never be told. It will be hidden from you. And it explains why communism continues to flourish despite the facts. And I want you to pay attention, because you've got to share this to people. You've got to spread it far and wide, especially to the millennials, especially to minority communities and people who feel they're disenfranchised, because they're the most vulnerable. Communism seeks to organize the discontent and communism seeks to stir up the discontent. But you have to understand that communism and Marxism was never, ever designed to liberate the common person. Communism was never designed from the beginning to liberate anyone. It was never designed to set the common people free. It was never designed to feed them. It was never designed to create social justice. It was never designed to create liberation. Communism was never designed to help the common man. That is a complete and utter lie that is told repeatedly, because unfortunately most of the common men and women have no knowledge of history. So they believe the promises of the communist revolutionaries, and they end up into a hellish slavery that was worse than their conditions to begin with. You see, you must understand this, because it will never be taught to you in any school of higher learning. It will not be taught to you in the media. It will almost never be taught to you anywhere unless you study for yourself. Communism is a system carefully created by the world's wealthiest people, the globalistic financial elite, the head of the international banking families, the head families in the Illuminati and Skull and Bones and Bilderberg and everything else. Communism was created by the world's elite as a trap where they would offer to the common man and the working man around the world. The Illuminati trained Karl Marx. Karl Marx was a Satanist. He went to a satanic church that his sister ran. He hated God. But you need to understand something, that Karl Marx was trained by the Illuminati. The Illuminati trained him to write the Communist Manifesto, which is simply a copy of the Illuminati Manifesto. It is designed to appeal and to seduce ignorant men and women who are part of the middle class and the working class, because it promises social justice, it promises equality, it promises liberation, it promises utopia, it promises to right all these wrongs. But that is a lie. That's the bait. That's the bait. In reality, listen carefully, man. You got to write this down, and then you got to learn it and own it. In reality, the true purpose of communism is to be bait for a fishhook to enslave mankind. The communist revolutionaries are trained to seduce the average working man or woman into joining a revolutionary cause where they're promised freedom and prosperity and this perfect world utopia. But again, in every single communist revolution, without exception, the exact opposite always happens. The working man and the common people end up worse off than they've ever been. There is always mass slaughter, murder, mass starvation, the taking away of rights, brutality, torture, slave camps, forced starvation, and repression that is like hell on earth. Always. There is no exception. So how does it keep working? Why does the same old trick keep working? Because the Illuminati and people like that, they control the educational systems. They control the media. So the common man and the working man doesn't know the truth about communism. So when it's offered to them, they think, wow, this is our ticket to freedom, when indeed it's not. Now, I document this in simple, fast-moving terms, in powerful ways in my books. I prove everything that I've just said. It's a fast-moving, they're fast reads. I give you documentation. I give you quotes from the most credible world leaders in human history. And in my books, A Prophecy of the Future of America, in the book, The Day the Dollar Died, in the book A Prophecy of the Future of America, 2016-2017, which is completely different than the other Prophecy of the Future of America, especially in the book Conquering the Matrix, and in the book Are You Ready? And the other books, you will, in a mind-blowing, quick way, discover a truth of what I'm saying, that the Illuminati use communism and socialism as the bait to enslave the masses. Okay? Because the other brutal reality, which I explain in my books, it's very hard for people to understand, is that the men and women who compose this elite superclass, they truly believe that they are genetically superior. They truly believe they belong to a master race. They truly believe that they're God-men, if you will. And as such, they privately and secretly look down on other races and groups of people as if the other races and groups of people are genetically inferior, like animals. They're not going to say it publicly. And therefore, they don't have any, they don't have to wrestle with their conscience when they murder and slaughter and cheat and deprive the working classes and the middle classes, because they see themselves as genetically superior. They see us like dogs. They say this in their own writings. So the goal of communism, which is what all these revolutions you see happening in America, like Occupy Wall Street, like the riots in Ferguson, like the Antifa riots, all this stuff that you think is one thing is really something else. It's organized by this group of Illuminati-trained agents as a means of igniting a revolution that will take down America as a democratic nation where people are free and prosperous. That's the game plan. So you have to understand that groups like ISIS, groups like Antifa, and these other groups are being used by powerful elements in our society to create a manufactured crisis for the purpose of revolution. Now, let me give you an example. When Hegel, who was the co-author of the Communist Revolution and the book on the Communist Revolution called, it slips my mind for a moment, but the famous book written by Karl Marx and Hegel, the Communist Manifesto, was written by them, and Hegel, who was the co-author, said that this collectivist, that means the group, and socialist ideology, and he inspired Karl Marx to write with him the Communist Manifesto. And Hegel and Marx preached that the collective, that means the groupthink, the world brain, the state, must be ruled and directed by a centralized government. Now listen carefully. And in all of their teachings, they believe that all individualism must be destroyed for the greater good. Therefore, you'll notice something. In all these communist societies, you're not allowed to be an individual. Your individual must be suppressed. You got to go along with the program, the groupthink. You got to become one with the state, one with the collective, and your individuality from God is completely obliterated. That's a very evil thing. They claim in their Communist Manifesto that the state is God, and the state has the supreme right against the individual, and that the individual has a duty to this godlike state, to be ruled totally by this state. And this is evil beyond comprehension. So this is how it plays out. Using the philosophy of Hegel and his Hegelian dialectic, and written about in the Communist Manifesto, the strategy, this is the primary strategy they always use and have used in 100 years of initiating communist revolutions. The strategy of bringing about a communist revolution, which is really a mechanism by the elites, the powerful elites, so that they control the masses by deliberately creating division. You got it? So it is essential to their game plan, and I want you to really listen. It's essential to their game plan to trigger or create a super problem or a manufactured crisis or riots or Antifa or an immigration crisis or a health crisis or a racial crisis. It's absolutely part of their game plan, okay, that a crisis occurs, because then this, like a chess game, this gives the rulers or the secret elite the opportunity to come to the average working class and middle class man or woman. The elite gets to come to the working class, and they're not going to tell them they created the crisis, but then they offer the average man and woman a so-called plan for freedom, okay? But the so-called plan for freedom is always secretly designed to give the elites more power and more wealth, and it is always designed to take away money and wealth from the average person, and it is always an excuse to strip all freedoms from the average person. So historically, without exception, every communist, socialist, progressive, idealistic revolution that has occurred in the last 150 years has been specifically designed by the elite, and the elite specifically manufactured a crisis event or emergency so that they could come forward like the saviors and offer a solution, like a communist society or whatever. But in that solution offered by the elites, it always ends up, by design, destroying all of the freedoms that the average man and woman has. It always serves to bring them under brutal oppression and tyranny, where all their rights are stolen. It always serves to turn them into slaves and dogs, where they work endless hours slaving away, and they are economically far worse than they ever have been. And then if they dare to raise their voices in protest, they're shot, killed, and tortured. That is the legacy of these communist revolutions. And there is no exception. But they do this by order out of chaos, which is a motto developed by the Freemasons. And the symbol of order out of chaos is the bird, the phoenix bird, which is a back on the back of the US dollar, which is a mythological bird which dies in a crisis, it dies in flames, and then resurrects from the dead as a symbol of the old order dying through revolution, and the new world order, like the phoenix rising out of the ashes, brings in this so-called new utopian world, which of course is never true. It's a dictatorship, a total lockdown where the masses are slaves. I mean, this is it. Now, why is this important? We're going to get to it in just a second. And again, I'm telling you, I need your help to spread the message far and wide to as many people as you can. That means you have to use, I'm asking you to use your creativity, your imagination. Some of you are very clever and creative about promoting and using, and you're sophisticated about how to use Facebook and other social media. I need you to employ it in spreading this message, because we don't really have much time left. And people have to learn what we're explaining, because the average man in America, working class or middle class, has been dumbed down and deprived from critical information. So they are just as ripe to be seduced and enslaved as every other suffering group in human history. And they're going to use the exact same formula that they've used every single time. And we never see the problem. The problem we have in America is we Americans have a giant mental block. We think falsely that just because America has always been free, and just because America has always managed to stay free, that somehow, we think this subconsciously, that somehow we're going to be immune from a communist takeover. I am telling you with all my heart that if you're embracing that delusional thinking, you're in for a rude awakening. Our pride, our arrogance has caused us to be blinded from the reality of the problem. At this moment, we are more vulnerable to a revolution which will take over our nation and turn it literally into some kind of totalitarian dictatorship, where there will be mass imprisonment, mass arrests, mass starvation, and you will lose every freedom you ever had. And once those freedoms are taken away, they will not come back. Do not deceive yourself. The Jews made this mistake many times. Read the Old Testament. The Jews were unprepared for their times of demise, because they deluded themselves into thinking that because they were the children of God, they would somehow escape these things and God would deliver them. But they forgot to look at the fact that they had rebelled against God, and they were naked and on their own, and they were brought into captivity many times in a horrible way. God does not want his people to make that mistake. This is not a defeatist message. We can turn it around, but we don't have much time to turn it around. And the first way we turn it around is we have to get rid of this deception, which is acting like a narcotic among God's people. And then we have to cry out to God and engage in the spiritual battle before us. You're listening to the Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire. We're going to continue in a moment. This is the Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire. The first thing we need to understand is that we are in a battle for the hearts and minds of mankind. And the primary battlefield that exists in America and around the world is an information battlefield, which takes place in the arenas of social media, the internet, search engines, videos, YouTubes, articles, blog sites, blogs, news, radio, television, etc., because those areas control people's thinking for good or bad. So most Americans are plugged in to this kind of virtual reality or matrix of ideas through their earbuds, through their big screen TVs, through their social media, whatever. But they're being presented with a false and distorted picture that is a picture designed to control them and enslave them. And it is a picture designed to move them incrementally into a world socialist government, because that has been the plan from day one, perhaps beginning in 1919 in America. It's been a slow, incremental plan, but it's been increasing every year. You know, every time I turn on television, I notice the methodical propaganda being promoted in the big episodic television programs, in the news programs, in the movies, and you add that all up, the average American and the average young person who doesn't know how to think for himself, who does not have their own first-hand grasp of history, is just like a sponge sucking this stuff up. I'll give you a case in point. There's a movie, an episodic TV show called Designated Survivor. I forgot the star. He was the guy who starred in Sutherland, Kiefer Sutherland. He starred in 21. In 21, he played this kind of high-powered, they made it look like he was a conservative, kind of anti-terrorist fighter. And so he won a huge audience. He won huge popularity by playing that kind of patriotic character who was willing to fight against the evils of terrorism. So the Hollywood left, as they usually do, they took that heroic figure of Kiefer Sutherland in Designated Survivor, and they completely recreated his character, because their prime purpose was to peddle propaganda. And they wanted to use Kiefer Sutherland as a vehicle to promote a worldview and an understanding about politics and reality that fit their left-wing socialist ideology. And the show, I mean, I watch it, but I got to hold my, ready to barf at any moment, because the show does not have integrity, because it's not honest. First of all, whenever any program elevates propaganda over character development and writing the script with integrity, you have a lopsided production which is inferior. That's just a rule of Hollywood. It has nothing to do with your politics. So the political preaching and the propaganda in Designated Survivor is obviously the primary concern of the writers. Well, whenever that happens, your show really stinks, because there's no character development, there's no storyline that's extremely strong. It's simply this guy pontificating his liberal political philosophy. So the entire purpose of the show is to sell you, they call it a neutral president or an independent president. But the reality is the primary purpose of the show is to sell you on a liberal, progressive, socialist, governmental in America. That's the purpose. And then, you can just on cue guess who the bad guys are. The bad guy is a white guy, of course. He's an entrepreneur who's made a lot of money. Of course, that Hollywood hates that. And he is a crazy patriot, and Hollywood loves that too, because that's a mythology they create. And so the wealthy white patriot is a psychopath who's threatening society. And of course, the liberal hero who has all the common sense is Kiefer Sutherland. So, but the TV episodic series is propaganda. Okay, and in order to carry off their propaganda, they have to lie about the truth. So, for example, Kiefer Sutherland makes a comment about how much he believes in a free press when speaking to like an independent alternative journalist, and he's willing to defend the alternative journalist's right to publish and promote his ideas, even if they attack him. Well, that sounds great on the show, but in reality, liberals don't treat alternative journalists with that kind of dignity and respect. They demonize them and they try to destroy them. So this is a complete lie. And then, there's another show, Madam Secretary, and You want to barf on that. Every other word out of this television show is propaganda and preaching a liberal political viewpoint, and always in preaching a liberal political viewpoint, which is socialism. They always demonize the conservative into being a psychotic. So it's essentially dishonest. It's propaganda. So now, on November 4th, there is supposed to be, as announced, the group Antifa is attempting a coup to replace our constitutional republic through a series of terrorist attacks. Well, who's Antifa? Who financed them? Who gave them their organization? How come these groups continually appear out of the middle of nowhere, seem to have endless money, endless contacts, are highly organized, way beyond their natural abilities? They keep appearing magically. It's very suspicious, because I don't believe they're the spontaneous groups that the media is saying they are. I believe there are very powerful players behind each one of these groups that are training them, that are funding them, in many cases secretly running them. Why? They want to create manufactured chaos and violence in America through a process of destabilizing terror attacks, which will allow them to declare martial law. Martial law will allow them to declare a communist-style socialist state and take away all your freedoms and all your prosperity and all your constitutional rights. Okay? You need to be aware of that. That's the purpose of manufactured crisis. It was developed by communists. Now, we have the Vegas shooting. The Vegas shooting, obviously, is not what it appears to be. Okay? It is part of this global, this manufactured crisis in America. It's part of it. And they hid all kinds of stuff. Okay? There appears to be a relationship between an organized relationship, and then you got to ask yourself, who's organizing the relationship between this vicious Latin American gang, perhaps the most violent gang in the world, called MS-13. There's a cooperative effort between Antifa, MS-13, and ISIS to instigate riots, revolution, killings across the United States, supposedly beginning on October 4th. Again, if it doesn't start officially on October 4th, it's coming quickly. Why were these groups allowed into the country on purpose? Why were these groups heavily armed on purpose? Who trained them? Because they are not intelligent enough in among themselves to operate without being trained by the highest level sources. They could never generate an emotional contagion. They could never create a series of crises that would destabilize democracy by themselves. It's way beyond their ability. Somebody is behind them with a lot of money, somebody who wants to destroy a free America and the Constitution. So, when we do an analysis of Antifa, MS-13, and ISIS, it appears that there is a planned terror attack, or a series of terror attacks against the United States of America that will be on a very large level, that will scare and terrify the average American. And the purpose of it is to create manufactured crisis for the purpose of establishing a totalitarian socialist state where all your freedoms will be taken away. My personal opinion, from reading everything that Soros has done in his life, that's what he's all about. He is an agent of the elite, like the Illuminati. he dropped $18 billion to fund, I don't know if he's funding these direct groups. It would be impossible to prove, I'm sure. But he dropped $18 billion the other way to fund some kind of revolution in America. Why is that? Because that's their goal. They don't like a free America. Don't you find it interesting that you have all these photographs of Bush Jr., Bush Sr., Bill Clinton, and Obama palling it up and laughing? There's been numerous pictures of that. Like they're all part of the same club. Well, the truth is they are part of the same club. And if you ask yourself, well, how could that be? Because Bush, passed himself off as a conservative and a patriotic American. Well, obviously he's not. If he feels so comfortable and happy with people that want to bring down America, George Bush Jr. is not a patriotic American. He's part of these secret clubs. He's a member of the Illuminati. He's an active Skull and Bones member. And they're globalists, and they want to bring down the America. That's why he and Bill Clinton were instrumental in the trade treaties. So there's more, though, okay? Remember Stephen Paddock, the so-called killer in the Vegas massacre? There have been reports that he was an Air America pilot who was trafficking for the CIA guns and children. And so he wasn't this, nutty gambler they make him out to be. Then we have the fact that Antifa, MS-13, and ISIS, think about this. We have more spy technology. We have more satellites. We have more surveillance than the average American that has ever occurred in the history of mankind. We're under more scrutiny, electronic surveillance everywhere we go. We're being spied on everywhere we go. How is it that as we're constantly increasing the surveillance against the law-abiding, tax-paying American, how is it that these MS-13 ISIS groups and Antifa alliance groups manage to grow, spread with total freedom? If all this spy technology that has been demanded is in place, why is it they don't seem to ever catch these terrorists before they commit their crimes? Well, I would suggest to you, based on their track record of using this high-powered surveillance technology, which doesn't seem to catch anybody who's a terrorist before they do their horrible plots, that the real reason of all this technology is to spy and control on the average American. Because obviously, if they were held accountable for their actions, their demands for having all this spy technology is completely discredited by the fact that this technology has never delivers, never actually catches the intended targets. It keeps the average American on surveillance. So we're being conned as usual. We see that key members of the FBI and others were involved. They were involved with Russia. It was Clinton who got involved, along with the whole thing is like Alice in Wonderland. It was Robert Mueller, it was Clinton, and it was the Democrats who were the ones that were really involved in Russian collusion, selling uranium to the Russians. Total lies have been told about Trump. So, now we have George Soros, who appears to be leading a plot to overthrow this country by using terrorism. And if it's not George Soros, it's some other secret elite group. So the question is, why are the wealthy elite seeking to overthrow America as we know it through terrorism? because they want to install a communist government, a total lockdown that will replace our constitutional republic. And they know the historic principle that was used by Hitler. Hitler gained absolute power over the people by burning down the German capital. So the communist leaders in Russia talked about this. Hitler talked about it. It's a well-known fact that terrorism, or the fear of terrorism, has historically been used by governments throughout history as a pretense for establishing a total lockdown and dictatorship. You see, this is where we are at. It's not a joke. We're on the verge of it. So I want to simply ask you to spread this far and wide. If you want to read the various mechanisms which are causing this, then you need to get yourself a copy of my brand new book that was just released called Conquering the Matrix, which explains this entire kind of dynamic. You need to read my book, A Prophecy for the Future of America, the first book, and the entirely different and new book, A Prophecy of the Future of America 2016-2017. You definitely need to read Mass Awakening and the other books that explain this to you. And then most of all, you need to take ownership of the problem and not hide your eyes from the reality of what's happening, like the mother and wife of a husband and father who is molesting his 6-year-old daughter, and everybody is, in denial of it, and the daughter is suffering horribly. It's unpleasant. You're going to have to challenge your normalcy bias, but you're going to have to open your eyes to an ever-present danger. If these people are allowed to get away with what they plan to begin November 4th or whenever they begin it, the media, don't kid yourself, the media is going to lie through their teeth. They're going to fan the flames. And the deepest concern I have, which I shared with you yesterday, is that there are going to be numerous attempts using psychological manipulation, mind control, and persuasion through media, social media, the internet, broadcasting, etc., to reach different demographic people groups in our society. And I'm going to warn you again, like I warned you the other day. Those people who would call themselves Christians, conservatives, people who believe in America, people who voted for Trump or whatever, as a group, they need to be educated in the psychological warfare, mind control dynamics of what is happening in this battle for America. If they are not aware of these dynamics, they're going to walk into a trap that will bring this nation down. And let me just recap what I said on yesterday's program. If you fit in the category of a conservative or a Christian or somebody who believes in America, or you know people who fit into that category, after 40 years of research, which you can read in all of my books at paulmcguire.us and the free radio programs, etc., you are going to discover that you are going to be baited. There's going to be a nice fish hook with something appealing wrapped around a hook designed to get you to bite the fish hook and to be catched. You're going to be baited. There are going to be powerful attempts of psychological coercion designed to seduce you. And the thrust of the psychological strategy against honest Americans who work hard and patriotic, whatever race they are, the primary psychological attack will be on several levels. And I explained it in Conquering the Matrix. But the first level is the media and social media and psychological internet principles such as emotional contagion are going to be used against you to generate fear and anxiety. That is designed to keep you psychologically off balance. That is designed to get you to do things that you wouldn't normally do if you were in your right mind. You need to track with me here. I'm exposing a systematic psychological operation that is targeting you and people you know. If you don't understand the elements of the psychological operation, you are going to be coerced without you even knowing it into doing things that could cause us to lose America. You have to understand you're going to be baited, seduced, and manipulated through the media, through things that people say, through social media, through Facebook and everything else, and any other means of communication you can think of. The images you see on TV, which are selected, are going to be designed. They don't even have to say a word. All they have to do is show you a series of images. And they're going to be designed to arouse in you a tremendous amount of what you believe is justifiable anger. And you are going to be tempted, and if you're not aware, you're going to be seduced and to succumb and to give in and to bite the bait into, you think you're doing it out of bravery, and you think you're doing it because you're hearing a voice in your head, it's time to take a stand, or, it's time for us to stand up for our rights. That's all seduction, that's all the bait. You are going to be baited into taking a stand, into striking back in some way, into being very aggressive to show these people, what strong America is made of. And you're going to be given a dozen different justifications as to why you should embark on this, what you're going to perceive as legitimate defensive behavior. I am telling you with everything in me, that is a psychological bait designed to bring you down. It's a psychological warfare operation aimed against you, and it is a psychological seduction to pull you into a violent physical conflict that could involve guns and violence. And once you bite that apple, once you allow yourself to be seduced, because simultaneously, you're going to hear voices of so-called leadership within the conservative or patriotic community that it is now time to take a stand. And they're going to try to coax you into retaliation because they're going to try to convince you that it's legitimate. I want you to understand the dynamics of what is going to happen in the very near future. Many of the voices that you're going to hear that you consider respected leadership within the conservative, patriotic, Christian community, there will be a certain percentage of voices from people that you respect that are going to be encouraging you to get involved and fight back, because now's the time. I am telling you with everything in me that kind of leadership is either the product of very foolish thinking on their part, or at worst, they are disinformation agents designed to manipulate you psychologically to your own demise. Do you understand what I'm saying? I'm very serious about what I'm saying. The fastest way to lose this struggle for America, the absolute fastest way to lose, is for conservatives, Christians, people who love America of whatever race. The fastest way you can lose is if you go out there and engage these people face to face. If you show up in large numbers and you engage in confrontation, the media and the organizers and these trained revolutionaries are going to use your confrontation with these people as a pretense to create martial law, and that means you've given them inadvertently the justification to seize control of this nation militarily, because after all, that's the only way we can keep the peace. And if you give them the opportunity to create martial law, they are going to overrule Trump. We will be run by the military, and we will live for the rest of our lives in a socialist communist government with no rights. America will be changed forever. That's how serious this is. You understand what I'm saying? Now, you're going to have to fight the temptation to retaliate in the flesh, no matter how justifiable it may seem. You must allow your God-given wisdom to rule your behavior and thinking, even if it appears on one level that the absolute most justifiable thing you could do would be to fight fire with fire on some level. You must resist that temptation. I don't think it's wrong to counter-protest and show up in large numbers, as long as it is very, very defined that there is a physical distance separating you and these other groups. Because if that barrier breaks, and there are people who would make sure it would break, hidden agents, and you end up in a face-to-face encounter with these people, you're going to lose, because it's going to end up going crazy and violent, and martial law is declared. There is something very strange about what happened in the Vegas shooting. If a answer emerges in the middle of this volatile conflict that begins November 4th, and let's say, this is just hypothetically, prepare yourself, it could be the opposite message. But let's just say hypothetically, this is just one approach. I'm not saying this approach that's going to be used. It's just one approach. Let's say, as Antifa is demonstrating, MS-13 is demonstrating, all these intense demonstrations are going crazy. And then all of a sudden, millions of Americans hear that there truly were multiple shooters who slaughtered all those innocent Americans. And it's been determined that the multiple shooters were from ISIS or Antifa or MS-13. Now, imagine the toxic mix of emotions. People are already hyped up, and now conservatives and patriotic people and Christians hear in the middle of these demonstrations that they found out that Antifa or ISIS or MS-13 were the ones responsible, that there really were second and third and fourth shooters, and collectively they massacred Americans. Okay, let me tell you how that would play out. That would be like throwing a stick of dynamite of anger and rage into a group of people that are all already angry and upset. And there's a high likelihood that the release of that information at that time, or any other information, would lead to violence and conflict, which would demand a military lockdown response. If you succumb to that, you lose. Remember that. You lose. You lose. You're not being brave. You're not being gutsy. You're being stupid, because you're not thinking about what your actions are going to produce long term. So I'm warning you why it's important to spread this message far and wide. You've got to inform as many people as you can of the dynamics I've shared with you, but most importantly, you have to forewarn people that they're going to be baited, and it's going to appear to be justifiable, okay, into taking aggressive action against MS-13, Antifa, ISIS, or whatever. And many people, and you're going to hear many voices saying it's not, now it's time to take a stand. How do you know who those voices are? How do you know that even if they're leaders, they're not secretly working for somebody else? Because the end result of that kind of talk and that kind of emotional environment is to get people to do things that are violent, and that invites military lockdown, which means the loss of freedoms. You don't win, you lose. Now, I've said that. I need you to explain it to people. I need you to distribute it far and wide. I don't hear this message being proclaimed really anywhere. The Lord put this on my heart he showed me things, and he put it in my heart to say. And we're going to continue to pray and ask God for wisdom, but I need you to help me spread this message coherently to as many people as we can. Now, as I've said earlier, we are in a battle for the hearts and minds of mankind. Right now, we reach a large number of people, but we're basically operating in an audio operation. Here we are in the middle of a crisis. That could be headed off. That could be neutralized. But we have limitations in the numbers of people that we can reach. That is not good strategically. If at this moment we had a studio up and running, or even a partial studio up and running, along with our Roku channels and other channels and our ability to broadcast, live streaming, etc., we could instantly, at this moment, reach 30 to 40 or 50 more times people instantaneously than we can now. That means by simply finishing our television studio, by enhancing our social media, by incorporating live streaming, by televising and showing videos with this radio program. If we simply accomplish those television media enhancements, live streaming, and broadcasting, then at this moment, at this emergency moment, we could reach millions and millions and millions and millions of more people instantly than we can presently now. We have to have the capacity to do that, because when these crises come up, there needs to be a mass level of communication that can reach the enormous numbers of people necessary to make a change in their behavior, and necessary to inform them of the danger. So I am asking you, it should be obvious from everything that I've said, that we have to multiply the impact of our message. We are in the process of doing it. We're talking about television, video, broadcast studios, etc., etc. This is not for indulgence. This is for maximizing the communication. It gives us the power to more powerfully communicate. So I need you to go before the Lord, recognize your responsibility, recognize what's going on. Ask God, Lord, how much do you want me to give or donate or contribute to Paul McGuire Ministries in this critical hour? Understand how urgent it is. Go to the Lord and then act on faith and make a contribution or a donation based on what he's really telling you to do, even if it means stepping out on faith, so that we can launch this. We could launch this with these a certain number of donations. We could launch this change and expand this thing hugely in a very short period of time if we get X amount of donations and contributions. And I thank God so many of you have been listening to the Lord, especially recently, and stepping out on faith and doing quite unusual things in the amount of your donations, in your willingness to really seek the Lord on how to donate. And I thank those of you that are consistently faithful, because that's the foundation of everything we do. And I thank those of you that understand that we are in a spiritual warfare, and your fervent intercessory prayers are everything. And finally, we need to pray. As I've expressed in earlier programs, we need to engage in spiritual warfare against the principalities and powers. We need to bring down these spirits of darkness that are trying to create chaos. We can win this battle that I've outlined by overruling the human activity by the power of prayer and understanding what the Apostle Paul said. For our fight is not against flesh and blood, it's not against people, but it's a spiritual battle against the principalities and powers and the dark unseen forces of wickedness in heavenly places. Join us November 17th, powerful Paradise Mountain Church meeting. In the meantime, spread this far and wide. You know, I'm not playing games. I'm not here to play games. Okay, you guys know me. I'm not here to play games. I'm not here just to make money. In fact, I'm not here to make money at all. Okay, there's many things I could do to make a lot more money than I'm doing now. I'm here because God's called me to be here. He's given me a certain amount of wisdom. And when we're able to communicate to vastly larger numbers immediately, because we have partners who are willing to join us in faith with donations, bold donations, then it doesn't take much. We can ramp up exponentially the power of our outreach by going visual, because we live in a visual generations, and then we can prevent this kind of nonsense. See, if people are just being sucked into this mind control programming of the mainstream media, they're going to end up behaving violently and crazy. But if we can, through social media broadcasting and alternative network broadcasting, communicate visually, we can disarm these attacks. See, we can expose them before they happen. And I believe that's what God wants. And I believe that's why you and I were called for such a time as this. I don't believe that God took America this far to lose it because of George Soros and this Illuminati elite and the rest of it. I believe with all my heart, I know God's bigger. God is in the business of dropping Goliaths. And so it will be in this situation. We will participate together in faith in dropping Goliath. This is Paul McGuire. Let's go for it, man. We were called for such a time as this. Visit paulmcguire.us. That's paulmcguire.us, and help us and stay connected. Again, visit paulmcguire.us, paulmcguire.us. God bless you. I'm Paul McGuire.